So good morning, everyone. And today we are on the Wheelchair Testing Center's group meeting. Today is February 9th, 2022. And I would like to introduce some of our new members. We have the University of Pittsburgh Tissue Integrity Management Lab. So that's the team lab. And we have Alex, who's going to be part of our presenters today. But they're actually going to be talking about the wheelchair and cushion standards. So I just want to welcome all of the team lab here. So if you see Alex, Tricia, and Dr. Bransa, they are all going to probably be part of our group at some point. And also, I also want to, I think someone said something. Okay, if not, I also want to introduce Kara Coupling. She is our presenter today as well. And I'm going to give her some time to present herself in a couple of minutes because I know that I would also want to start with a couple things as housekeeping. So for everyone, I would like to kindly ask you to please go to the bar at the bottom that we have and go to participants, click on more after your name, and please rename yourself with your name, the country that you are located in, and then the facility that you are representing today, please. I'm just gonna give everyone a couple minutes to do that. Okay. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I see most of us are changing our names now. And I would like to start with our agenda. So for today, we have 4 different topics. The first one is going to be wiki updates. So some of the changes that I have been doing, and I'm going to go through them really quick. Then we're going to have some French wheelchair testing. That's going to be through Elora Flinois from Serra. And then we're going to have our test lab certification with Kara Coupling, who is also part of ISO, RESNA, and Permobil. And finally, we're going to talk about the wheelchair and cushion standards with Alex Delasio from the University of Pittsburgh. So let's start with the introduction. So Elora, would you like to introduce yourself to the group, please?
Yes, of course. So hello, everyone. First, I would like to say sorry for my French accent. And also, I'm going to speak with my colleagues from the Serra because I'm not here in my establishment for a very long time. So I'm very new in the wheelchair testers. So for the precise question, maybe I'm going to ask my colleague, Alain Pavlovski. So as Stephanie told you, I'm part of the Serra, which is the Institution Nationale des Invalides. This is a center that study the equipment for the disabled person. And maybe, I don't know, Stephanie, if you have 5 minutes, I can quickly present the Serra. If you want, it's not an obligation. So I can share my screen and present a little bit quickly my structure.
Yeah, what if we do that before you
After?
start with the French wheelchair testing? Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Okay.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Kara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Coplin. I am the Director of Regulatory Science with Permobil. My background is in materials engineering, and my role is to bring the preclinical mechanical testing evidence to our product family. Also in this role, I am very active in the development of ISO standards, and I participate in the Wheelchair Standards Committee. And in the US, I chair the ANSI-RESNA Committee for wheelchairs and related seating. I also serve as the liaison in the European standards, working between the ISO wheelchair group and SEN and their development of wheelchair standards for the region. And last but not least, I'm very fortunate to work very closely with the team at the University of Pittsburgh, so I'm happy about that.
Thank you, Kara. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So my name is Alexandra Delazio. I work as a research engineer in the U.S. in the University of Pittsburgh, Department of Rehab Science and Technology. I helped to form the University of Pittsburgh Wheelchair and Cushion Standards Group, which we'll be talking about today, and basically help to lead and manage wheelchair cushion testing. So we specifically look at the cushion itself. As Kara mentioned, we help with industry testing, we help with different groups, and just excited to spread the word about all of those things. Also work in the Tissue Integrity Management Lab, which we look to prevent pressure injuries and prevent pressure sores and ulcers through standardized testing, through different research studies, et cetera. And I'm sure Tricia will be talking a little bit more about that when she introduces herself. But I'm excited to be here and excited to talk with everyone today. So hello.
Thank you, Alex. I know you introduced Tricia. Tricia, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, good morning. Didn't expect that, but so I'm glad I was paying attention. So good morning. I am from the University of Pittsburgh as well. This is the first time joining this group. I primarily do work with cushion standards and testing, but I am involved in the international standards and the RESNA national US or North American standards development, and I oversee that effort. So I have, some involvement in standards for other technology besides wheelchairs as well. And glad to join the group.
Thank you, Tricia, and thank you, everyone. So for now, I'm just gonna go ahead.
Be in the sled lab.
I'm just gonna go ahead and start with the wiki updates. So let me go ahead and basically, as I mentioned before, we're gonna go and talk about updates on the website, and then I'm gonna explain a little bit our transition from the PIT groups or the SharePoint into Google Groups, okay? So some of the slight changes that you may find in our website is when you go to wheelchairnetwork.org /wheelchair testing, now we have changed this a little bit. So before you saw all the list of testing, now you're gonna have 4 different main groups with small information on each category. So for instance, if we click on testing methods, now we're going to have a separation from wheelchair testing methods and wheelchair seating testing methods. And this is also because of the collaboration we have had with the Wheelchair and Cushion Standards Group from the University of Pittsburgh. So whenever you have time, please go ahead and click in this link. This will provide some additional information about what you're going to see today with Alex. So I'm not going to go and explain everything that we have there because Alex is going to be sharing all the resources available there. So we're just going to be able to link in this site to their website. So if you need any resource, you can find them on the Wheelchair and Cushion Standards Group from the University of Pittsburgh, or you can come here, which will send you to that website as well. Okay, so if we go ahead and click on any of the testing methods from here, for now, I'm just going to click on caster testing. You can always find this contribute tab on the site. So basically here we are relying on the experts' contribution. So if you are doing certain tests that you are an expert on it, or that you see there are some tweaks that you may want to do to the content, please feel free to revise the article or even add an article. So for instance, for the French wheelchair testing that you see today, if there's something specifically that we would like to add to the wiki, feel free to do that. We would be happy to add resources as well as part of this resource. I would also like to encourage you to be part of the contributors. If you want to do that, please feel free to reach out to me and I can provide some additional information on how to create an account and guide you through the process on how to edit the content. And finally, as I mentioned before, we're just going to be moving from the SharePoint PIT groups. You may remember that a couple months ago, you received an email that now you are part of a PIT group and you had a SharePoint there. So now we're actually going to be changing, and it's very likely that the new group is going to be called Testing Centers at googlegroups.com. So that you will probably be receiving an email from svasquez@wheelchairnet.org. So just be careful on that, like we will be receiving an email and we will be using this email as a distribution list. So if we have any questions that any member would be able to respond, we can use this email. Further communications are also going to be sent through this, as well as our meeting invites, okay? So with that, that's all that I have to say today from our end, and I would like to let Laura Flinois to introduce both SARA and also the French wheelchair testing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Laura, feel free to jump in.
Okay. So first, I would like to share you the presentation of my structure. This is the Serra. So very quick presentation. So the Serra, C for Center, E for Études, and R for Recherche sur l'appareillage des handicapés. Well, the traduction is simply the Center for Study and Research on Equipment for the Disabled People. So the Serra is part of the Invalides. So maybe you know this monument, but it's a very famous monument located in the center of Paris. It was built in the 17th century in order, well, to take care of the wounded soldiers and the veterans, and also the victim of war attacks. So you have in the Invalides 3 centers. The first center, that is the Veterans Center, well, it is considered as the home of the home of the veterans. There is also a second center, that is the Post-Traumatic Rehabilitation Center. Well, this is where the wounded soldiers, veterans, etc. are taken care of. And there is the SARA, the Center for Study and Research on the Equipment for Disabled. And to quickly summarize the SARA, well, we can define it as a unique center that is between the medical, the scientific, and technical field. And its expertise is on the equipment for disabled people, like manual wheelchairs, prostheses, etc. And the SARA also help the clinical, the industrial, and the institutional centers. Of course, because it is part of the Invalides, it is dedicated to the physically disabled person, like the wounded soldiers, veterans, and victims of war. And the SARA intervene in all the life of the equipment for disabled, from the prototyping to the equipment allocation. So in order to, well, do all these objectives, we have 5 main departments: the research department, the testing department, where we test, of course, the wheelchair and the prostheses. We have the development staff that prototypes everything we need in order to test our materials. We have also the documentation and information center in order to check, well, the regulations on those types of medical device. And we also have a medical centers in order to allocate the prostheses and the wheelchair. So here is my very quick presentation on the SARA. And now I'm going to present the wheelchair test for manual wheelchair. Please let me know if you don't hear the presentation, because I'm not sure if I checked the boxes when I share my screen. So,
hello everyone. Today I'm going to present you the French wheelchair test.
Okay, perfect. So I launch
test for a manual wheelchair. So to introduce this subject, I'm going first to present quickly some regulatory aspects in terms of health in France. Afterwards, I'm going to present the 4 tests we specifically do in France to test our manual wheelchair. Well, for the regulatory aspects, in France, you must know that each medical device must have the CE marking. We also have the public health insurance, called Assurance Maladie, that allows to reimburse every medical device, including wheelchairs. So here is a table that we group examples of the maximal price of reimbursements of 3 types of wheelchairs in France. However, a wheelchair must respect some criteria to benefit from this reimbursement. First, the wheelchair must be prescribed by a doctor. Then there is a request for prior agreement that is asked to the public insurance assurance maladie. Moreover, the brand and the model of the wheelchair must be recognized in France. And last but not least, this model of wheelchair has its price of reimbursement fixed by the French state. So to get recognized, a wheelchair must satisfy the CE marking, and as a consequence overcome tests you normally already know. However, the French state imposed 4 other tests for the manual wheelchair that are the carousel, the test of the caster wheels, the upholstery test, and the foot plate test. And for information, the same wheelchair sample must be subjected to all these 4 tests in whatever order. Currently, in France, the maximum weight dummy is 100 kilograms. The carousel consists of a circular track allowing to simulate the move of an anthropomorphic dummy loaded wheelchair on horizontal plane at 8 km per hour and with obstacles mimicking sidewalk jumps. So there are 2 steps during this test. The first is the wheelchair is subjected to synchronized obstacles on which both rear wheels climb simultaneously. The height is 150 millimeters and the approach ramp has a 7-degree slope. The wheels must overcome 1,800 times the obstacles. The second phase is when the wheelchairs go through desynchronized obstacles that induce torsions of the frame. The wheelchairs now must resist to 900 obstacles for each wheel. The carousel allows to test the frame and the rear wheels of the wheelchair. So to get the conformity of this test, the wheels must respect a specific value of warping, that is 5 millimeters, and a tolerance of 1.5 centimeters of displacement in the axles of the rear wheels. And in addition to warping and axle displacement, the wheelchair frame must not break or bend, etc. The caster wheels are installed on 2 turning rolls and the wheelchair is loaded with the dummy, conform to ISO, and is maintained on the platform. Each obstacle, that is represented by a metal lath, is fixed on the roll. The widths are 20 millimeters, the height 10 millimeters, and the speeds of the rolls are 8 kilometers per hour. These obstacles have an average face of 1.5 meters compared to each other, and it rolls for 56 hours, which represents 150,000 shocks. Here you see one type of obstacles, but there are plenty of possibilities. You can use corrugated iron sheets, you can add carpet or anything you want, and it allows to characterize the behavior of the caster wheels to different environments. To get conformity of this test, we measure the displacement in the axis of rotation of the fork and in the axle of the caster wheels. If this displacement does not respect a tolerance of 0.5 millimeters, it is considered as a non-conformity. Moreover, if there is any breaks or bends, it is considered as a non-conformity. So this type of test checks the solidity of the caster wheels, which, according to our testing team and also to literature, is a very common failure. So for the upholstery test, we drop on the wheelchair seat a dummy at 50 millimeters high. Afterwards, the dummy has a back part which leans against the backrest with a specific effort. The upholstery must overcome 6 drops per minute, which represent approximately 50,000 solicitations. This test allowed to measure the upholstery solidity, fixation, and deformation. And a non-conformity occurs when the upholstery breaks, tear, etc. And finally, for the footplate test, the wheelchair is waiting with a dummy, and the footplate are subjected to specific efforts 50,000 times. A non-conform product is when the footplates are broken, bent, etc. So here ends my presentation on these 4 tests. So thank you first for your attention, and if you have questions, do not hesitate.
So here ends my presentation. So as I said in the video, if you have questions, well, do not hesitate.
Thank you, Laura. That was a really good presentation on all the tests you're doing. Does anybody in the group have any questions for Laura?
Oh, go ahead, Don. Maybe he's disconnected. I just wanted to make a comment. So it's really nice to get an overview of the work there. We've known about your team, and I think I've seen the carousel test, but not the caster test. I just wanted to make you aware that we have developed a different caster test that is right now in the FDIS status at ISO. So it's ISO 7176-32. And it may, it offers some benefits over yours, although I certainly like your test, but the one possible benefit is that you can test multiple casters at the same time, and you don't need to test a frame in this test. So I'll put a link in the chat to get you right to that. But on the wiki, there's a detailed description of that test that may be something you want to consider, at least knowing about the different strategy. Another aspect of that test is that we do subject the casters to a salt fog chamber to introduce corrosion, which is a common failure mode of casters. So that's another aspect of it that that might be interesting for your team to look at.
Yeah, thank you. The reason why we didn't use the test you're talking about is because the French state imposed us to test also the caster wheels and also the frame at the same time. So maybe, I don't know about your solution, but I think it does not test the frame, does it?
No, it doesn't. We
Okay.
sort of rely on the double drum and curb drop test to test the frame. So we would, in sort of consideration of your test methods, think that the carousel might put the proper load on the frame to see if there would be a frame failure. But certainly, yeah, just something to look at, because the lead engineer on that is not on the call, but may have some interest in collaborating with you related to casters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Berman. Has anybody have another question?
Yeah, I do. I really like the upholstery test. I think that's something that's currently missing in our ISO standards. We don't do anything like that, at least as far as the wheelchair is concerned. Now, we do some repetitive testing of our seating devices, but not, those tests can be done off the wheelchair. And I really like that yours has the wheelchair included with that test. My other question is, do you do these tests on powered wheelchairs or just on manual wheelchairs?
Okay, so as I said, I'm new at the Serra, so I'm going to let my team that I see speak. I'm going to speak French because I don't know if they have understood. So, Alain, est-ce que tu fais les tests sur les fauteuils roulants électriques de sellerie?
Non, on ne fait que les tests de résistance sur les fauteuils manuels.
Okay, so we only do the upholstery test on the manual wheelchair.
Okay.
Alain, tu sais pourquoi on ne fait pas sur les électriques?
Parce qu'en France, c'était prévu de le faire dans un second temps et que ça ne s'est jamais mis en place. Parce que les normes sont arrivées après.
Okay, so my testing, it was planned to do the power wheelchair upholstery test, but when the norms arrived, well, they didn't impose it. No, I don't know why.
Okay. Thank you.
And Laura, those tests that you're doing, are those only for France, or are they also applicable in other countries in Europe?
Well, actually, as I said in the video, well, in order to get your products reimbursed in France, you have to do these tests in order to put it on the market in France. But in other countries, yes, they are not mandatory, I think. Well, I'm not thinking, I'm sure of it.
Thank you. Does anybody else have another question for Laura or the team? No?
Quick question. Is Serra, is it based near Metz?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think we had an ISO meeting there one time back in 2014, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know who is talking.
I'm Bob from the UK. Yeah,
Okay.
long time participant in wheelchair transport standards.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the Serra is known in the wheelchair field. In France, this is the only centers specialized in this type of equipment. And we did a lot of congress and meeting a long time ago because I was not here. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you heard about us.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's it was an interesting 2 or 3 days in Metz.
But all of you are welcome in Metz to see the Serra.
Hello, can I ask one question? Are you listening? Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you, Carlos.
Sorry. I had some message in my earphone. When you do this kind of tests, very interesting, the apparatus that you have created in your lab, are you using any kind of capture of signals like string gauges for displacement or tension or stress of the axis or the wheel or accelerometers to catch the balance of the wheelchair in order to move to a virtual simulation of this?
Well, we measure the displacement thanks to a comparator. I don't think if you know this device.
But physically, I mean, you measure before and after the test,
yes.
As I understood. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, not dynamically during the test. Very interesting. The off synchronized step. When you get the deformations or the displacements in the structure of the wheelchair. But my question was if you put some kind of string gauge to capture this displacement to really analyze, because when we get this, we can, let's say, spread this model to other structure, because it's a quite nice work you're doing there, capturing this. It's a shame that you cannot use visually This is one of the deals that I'm trying to put here in Brazil.
Yeah.
Exactly this, to capture, because then, okay, let's change the frame of the wheelchair. Let's put the same inputs and make an analysis before doing the physical tests that are expensive usually. Just a question and a ponderation. Thank you very much, Laura.
That's a very, very, very interesting, because, well, actually this kind of, well, I call this research, was not explored before, because, well, this is a wheelchair testing that, well, delivered the conformity or not on products. So, well, at the beginning, it didn't interest us. It didn't interest us to know the deformation, do the dynamic measures. But, well, we introduced a research team, and they like you, they ask us, why not doing all those tests in order to characterize the behavior of the frame, the casters, etc., etc. But actually, we are beginning to do all these tests, and we are actually working on, especially on vibration on the wheelchair. That is this is a PhD. This is going to lead to a thesis on vibration on wheelchair. So you are welcome to join us if you want, if you have ideas, if you want to do some research at our center. Yes, you're all welcome. And I am going to take into account all your remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. I don't know if I have the contact of Laura, but later on I asked to Stephanie. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm going to make sure to put you both in contact as well. Thank you. So with this, I think we can proceed with Cara and the test lab certification. Cara, if you would like to share your screen, let me know if you have any issues and I'll make sure to fix that. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm speaking to you kind of wearing both of my hats, my industry hat working for Permobil, and Permobil is a manufacturer of power and manual wheelchairs, and also wheelchair seating, specifically cushions and backs, including the former Rojo cushion. So a lot of my work is involved, focused on the cushions themselves, and we do sell our products throughout the world, so we're subject to a number of regulations and standards. And with my involvement with the standards committee, I also see how sometimes the standards are universally adopted. Sometimes there are those national tests that are developed, like we just saw. And there's recently come into question the type of certification that a laboratory should have that is providing those test results, whether it's testing to ISO standards or regional standards. And so I'm going to share with you what we know and what our experience is, but then I also want to hear from you and understand how this is handled throughout the world, and maybe you'll have some guidance for us with wearing my standards hat on where we might help offer guidance to industry and regulators. So let's see. So for starters, we have typically, as manufacturers, come across two general requirements. There are the good laboratory practices that have been adopted, of course, throughout the world. And then ISO itself has developed a very specific laboratory certification program and standard, and that is ISO 17025. And that has the specific requirements for competence of testing and calibration laboratories. And so what we wanted to investigate was who actually is asking for each of these types of practices in the labs, and what should we be recommending as a standards committee. So let me show you some examples. In the US, The Food and Drug Administration, under the US Department of Health and Human Services, requires that all testing, especially of course including testing in wheelchairs and medical devices, be done by laboratories that follow good laboratory practice. And they have guidance about what that means, what that interpretation is, how the facilities should be managed, the equipment maintained, calibration performed, qualifications of operators, calibration requirements and reporting, and all of those details. So when products are registered in the US, this is all part of that process of testing through an appropriate lab and having the appropriate evidence as part of the backup and support and qualification of a wheelchair or a wheelchair seating system. The US does not talk about the requirement for ISO 17025 certification for that lab. It just stops with the good laboratory practice. And in the EU, there are the new requirements of the medical device requirements, which publication began several years ago, but they are officially in place as of May of 2021. And when you dive into the depths of those documents, those spell out the requirements for having a product CE marked. And within that, within the official journal of the European Union, there are statements about the requirements for laboratories carrying out tests in accordance with good laboratory practice, again. And more details are given about exactly what that means, but of course it's very similar spirit to what the FDA has conveyed. So again, there's no mention of ISO 17025 requirement. Then in Europe, we're also held to meeting the requirements that have been established by SEN, by the European Standards Committees. And there are standards for manual wheelchairs and power wheelchairs. And within that, ISO test standards are specified, but there are reporting requirements within those ISO standards. But these EN documents, again, do not specify 17025 requirements. And it actually doesn't talk about good laboratory requirements. However, that is covered under that European level that we just looked at. So that's how Europe addresses the need for good laboratory practice. What we find as manufacturers is that it appears that it's the individual countries within Europe that are often requiring that all of the testing that's done be done by a lab that's certified to ISO 17025. So this is part of why we wanted to talk with you today about this and see if that's been the experience of the laboratories or those of you representing different countries, if you know that that's part of the regulation that has been set. And then we're curious about whether that's appropriate. The 17025 standard is, of course, invaluable for ensuring that quality of a lab and is widely applied across industries and across different types of mechanical and chemical and biological tests. But with our industry and with our testing, we do have such unique tests that we perform. And when it comes to the wheelchair cushions, especially those that are designed to prevent pressure injuries and the tests we've developed to evaluate those characteristics, we don't always have pass-fail requirements. So we're not sure that those would fit or be appropriate under this type of a lab certification. And plus it adds additional cost and barriers to testing for the laboratories to be able to be certified to this and to provide that service, and then for the manufacturers to pay for that additional cost that's involved with a lab that maintains this level of certification. So we looked at some of the standards that we are held to, and there is the biological standard ISO 10993 that is often applied to wheelchair seating. That's an ISO standard that spells out that a laboratory should be carried out in accordance with good laboratory practices, but it gives that guidance that it could be ISO 17025 certification or equivalent. So I feel like there's some latitude there. When we look at our specific standards that were developed just for wheelchairs and wheelchair seating, we're not seeing this specification. So we're still struggling with how is it that maybe some of our the European countries, when they're writing the tenders, have decided that they need to add in that requirement. And so one approach we're thinking about is that we have recently in the ISO committee, TC 173, SC1 for wheelchairs, we have created a wheelchair seating standards guidance document. And this just shows you the start of it, but it's meant to list out all the standards that apply for wheelchairs and wheelchair seating under ISO and be a guidance document for regulators, whether they're developing tenders or even insurance companies or facilities, so that they understand what tests are appropriate. And we're thinking that maybe we could address this issue of laboratory, either good laboratory practices or 17025 certification in this document, and just take away that ambiguity. So this is where I'm curious to hear from all of you what your perspectives and experience has been about being asked for proof of those practices within your labs or for that certification, and where you get these questions from. And then just what we think as a group might be appropriate. We just had our wheelchair seating standards committee meeting in the US earlier this week, and we're struggling with this as well. So it'd be great to have this international feedback. And so with that, I'm happy to hear from anyone who might have some thoughts here.
Hello, Cara. Yes, it's Jim Watson from Cranfield Impact Centre. So we perform dynamic tests, sled tests for wheelchairs. Now we're currently in the process of gaining 17025 accreditation for our lab. This was not necessarily just for wheelchair testing, but for all of our testing that we do. So it was certainly a big decision to make to go to 17025, because there is a big cost element to do this. Now we've already got 9001, ISO 9001 in place, which was of much benefit to us because that covers really 75% of 17025. So I think if labs were looking to get in 17025 from scratch, it would be a massive hurdle to undertake, and I wouldn't advise against it, but I would say you'd have to climb a big ladder to get up to it. But going up to 9001 first is what you need to be running with. Now we've just gone through at the moment then these stages. We've had our pre-audit, we've had our audit, and we're just going through some of the correction phases that we've had to do. As in all cases with a lot of audits, they've been particularly picky and unnecessary, some of the points, and some of the auditors from the ISO 17025 are not wheelchair testing experts. So some of their questions which they've asked are not so relevant, which has been particularly annoying, but it's a case of having to go through those hoops to try and gain the certification. Now, the reason why we are doing it is there's other bodies which are asking for 17025. So the FIA, the organisation that runs motorsport, they are also asking it for us. So it's on two levels really that we're and also there's another organisation that is also asking for it. So that's why we're doing this. There's the cost implication. The other thing which is I think which is relevant is that if you're certainly from a dynamic testing point of view, you're unlikely to start from scratch from doing dynamic testing. You'd have done some other form first, I think, of sled testing before you become established in doing 7176 testing. So you should be well on your way along those lines. But it's not an easy certification to get, and but we and it's not something which we took lightly before we did it.
It sounds like one advantage that your facility had was that you are performing tests for other bodies and industries and products. And so having this broad certification and then the specifics under it was easier. Maybe not, it's still difficult, but I mean, you've got more opportunities for that value to come through, as opposed to maybe a smaller lab that's just doing maybe 8 different wheelchair tests, and that's all that they do.
Yeah, that's right.
So that cost burden is so much greater if that's your niche market.
I mean, the other way that we didn't look at this, but the other way that you could do is, rather than have an ISO certification for a lab, is that you get it for an individual, which I think is possible. I can't remember. It's either.
Yeah, 17024, I think.
24, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a difficult subject. You know, if you were a 17024 a registered compliant test engineer, then if you saw an obvious fault, you would, and you told the customer that there was an obvious fault and to correct that before you go any further, then you would be acting in the wrong way, and you would probably have your license removed, which, to tell you the truth, I would find very difficult. So 17024 is a bit like an ashtray on a motorcycle. You know, it's just useless, I think. I think, Cara, I think it would be wise to I think the first sentence of the introduction of 17025 says this document contains requirements for laboratories to enable them to demonstrate they operate competently and are able to generate valid results. Laboratories that conform to this document will also operate generally in accordance with the principles of ISO 9001. So that I think the general laboratory practices which you have in your FDA document are certainly shadowed here in Europe by ISO 9001, which is it is quite far-reaching as in its role as a quality management system. We've anecdotally heard that 17025 is really has particular relevance when test labs are asked to develop new test methods which are specific to a new product or to evaluate something new onto the market, for where there is no given test method and they're creating a new one. And very often, this might be in the chemical industry or the medical industry or the pharmaceutical industry, where the consequences of a manufacturer having their own test house can have an influence on the results, if you know what I mean. Sure. So I think that's a large role of the ISO 17025 approval bodies, is to kind of block off, to cut off any possibility of influence for test outcomes. Certainly, if there is a test method, such as, you know, ISO 7176 Part 8 drop test, and you do this and you measure that, then ISO 9001 for general practices is pretty fairly good, and should be enough, really, 17025 is the new test method, new product, which is to evaluate new things in a reasonable and representative manner. I think that's the biggest responsibility. And certainly when you read through it, you pick that up as you read through it, because so much of it is irrelevant to the kind of test house that we're talking about, where we're following, ISO 7176, 16840 part, whatever, 1 to 15 standards, where we've got test methods, which are, some of them are under development, but that's covered by the ISO, standards maintenance approach, with revisions at 5-year intervals or less or whatever. So 17025, yeah, good, nice ring to it. Value.
Yeah, I would say, I think in our, say, if I'm just on top of my head, I'm thinking if we've had, say, in the last couple of years or so, 20 different wheelchair manufacturers come to us for tests, I think approximately 1 or 2 have asked for it.
I've also encountered that. I'm Nikki Orton from U of M Transportation Research Institute. We also run crash tests for the wheelchairs for Part 19 and for RESNA WC19. And we've had the same thing. A lot of the wheelchair manufacturers with an international reach are wanting only reports from an 17025 certified lab. And I feel like it's especially Australian manufacturers, I want to say, or people who are trying to sell in Australia was a particular one that was brought up, but it's definitely coming up a lot more often for us too.
And I think that your lab is a good example, Nicole, that you've developed the test methods, and you're an expert in this, and no one knows it better than you. And so we have that challenge where, as a manufacturer, if we do have a country asking us for that certification, we're really limited by who we can use, and it may not be the best results. Because we do have kind of specialized methods that were developed. So obviously, if we can have it all and everyone is ISO 17025 certified, then there's no question, and it's nice and clean. But I do think there's still room in the conversation for us for some of these wheelchair specific tests that maybe, yes, just demonstrating ISO 9001 certification is enough. Maybe just the general GLP, which any laboratory that should be used would follow anyway, should be enough. So I think that, like, one thing that you said, Bob, that's important here too, is that we need to demonstrate that independence, and that is a separate thing. So certainly a manufacturer doing their own testing in-house could be a conflict of interest. And so maybe we start by just making that clarification in our standards that independent testing is the requirement, and we require good laboratory practice. And maybe that's where we make the statement. And now, if we find there are some markets where we're still pushed to 17025, well, then we'll have to just go to those labs. But in the meantime, I think we've got a responsibility to offer guidance, really to help our industry and the end users of our products, and have testing be more available and appropriate without being overly burdensome and adding costs throughout the whole process when it's really not adding value.
I just wanted to add to that. I completely agree, Kara. We've in the last 15 years that I've been sort of part of test labs, we've contemplated this and then always gone and said there's just not enough resources available to already run a successful test lab plus have this. And so I think this goes to needing to set up guidelines and promote what we think are best practices. This is where I see the gap. So I think there's a lot of rationale related to, most of the test labs have developed the tests and they're very skilled at doing that. And so this certification is sort of just a cost associated with it. And, I think, Kara, some of the work that you've done to making it more clear how to use the standards, some of the work that we've been involved with like UNICEF, trying to run this global tender and really not having a guideline on how to set up the tender. What are the sort of the engineering tests that should be done? It's just not transparent. And I think that what happens is that people say, okay, ISO 17025 will guarantee that I have a good test, a reliable test, because they have no other, sort of guideline to say this is how to establish a tender and this is who I should trust to report results. And that, to me, it's something that we've talked with different funders about being important to help operationalize the standards so they can be used in these tenders. And that to me, I see as a big gap that we can all contribute to resolve.
I wouldn't mind seeing a few audits conducted on test reports. I think that could be a wise move. I think that I've certainly seen over the years reports of wheelchair dynamic tests for transport, Part 19 in particular, that have come from test houses that I have never heard of. And I've looked at the pre and post test stills and thought, oh, really? Some of them are a bit shaky. And I think one or two audits might be, but just to scare the living crap out of some of the test houses, I think would be a good idea, to realize that there are consequences to favorable test reports.
Yeah, and I think that's our challenge here too, that we do want to ensure good laboratory practice and that our test results are meaningful and appropriate and providing the safety needed for our wheelchair users. And so certainly 17025 on one hand does seem like the easy answer for a regulator and does give a lot of confidence, but also, yeah, that expertise with these particular methods, which may or may not fall with a lab with 17025 certification, needs to be somehow explained and have some type of a base level. And maybe that is just spelling out in the individual standards that we require good laboratory practice. And maybe just like it is in 10993, just saying, well, here's an option to demonstrate that, just to open up that conversation more so and help regulators know this isn't a completely black and white checklist, but have something in place. And in theory, that should happen, like as a manufacturer, when we applied for our CE mark and went through the MDR process and demonstrated our test results and have those test reports. If the EU, for example, were to audit us through that trail, that should lead us to, and which lab did you use and how did you qualify them under your ISO 13485 or 9001 system? And we would have to answer to that. And so that should help protect from having labs that aren't testing appropriately or somehow setting up and just cranking out reports.
Yeah, I think that's true with because the 17025 certification, it comes with a scope for your lab. And one of the easy options that I've seen is with some labs will have the scope covering them, perhaps making them a cup of tea. That process has been certified. And yet they're also doing all these other tests, but they've got it on their headed paper. We've got 17025, and it needs to be defined that they're actually in their scope is the wheelchair testing element.
Exactly.
I think that's important. But the other point you make about the or equivalent is if we had to make a decision, if we don't go for the 17025 for one of the test bodies, they would then have to do their own audit of us. Now, when we looked into what that was going to entail, it was even it was cheaper to do the 17025 than actually go through the audit process from the individual governing body, which was so onerous and costly as well, that it was better to do the 17025 because it's just a tick box then.
Right.
And it gets you on board then with the governing body.
We've heard that from other manufacturers as well. And an additional path could be that, like, we as the manufacturer in our compliance department would do that audit directly to have documentation that, yes, we looked at either the FDA or the EU's good laboratory practices, and we believe that our testing was done in that manner. That's why we accepted this test report, and that's why it's part of our package supporting our products. But not all manufacturers have the bandwidth to do that, and that's still a cost.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry for interrupting at this moment, but just in order to let our next presenter continue, I would have to let Alex present now. Thank you so much for the discussion. I think this is going to be a topic that we can continue in a later meeting as well. So thank you. And Alex, please feel free to share your screen anytime.
Absolutely. Here, let me grab that for you and get started. Thank you so much already to Laura and Kara for great presentations before me. So hope to continue on that path here. So let me go ahead and share. All right. So hi, everybody. So basically today we're going to be talking a little bit about the PIT Wheelchair and Cushion Standards Group and who we are. Like I said before, I'm Alexandra DeLazio. I work at PIT in the Rehab Science and Technology Department. My background is engineering, so I'm in bioengineering, mechanical engineering, medical product engineering, but I'm going to try not to get us too much into the engineering weeds here with this information. So basically, our group was formed as a part of our NIDLR-funded Rehab Engineering Research Center on Wheelchair and Cushion Performance Standards. So the Wheelchair and Cushion Standards Group, we look to translate the national and international performance standards in a way that is understandable and effective for healthcare professionals, manufacturers, wheelchair users, researchers, policymakers, you name it, to basically implement and call upon in daily practice. So as we've kind of been talking about, and as we all know here in this group, the standards can be a little complicated to implement. It can be hard to understand. It can be difficult to kind of bring them to life and do all of that. And our goal is just to basically get it out there to everyone and say, hey, here's what you can do with them. Here's what they mean, provide guidance, all of that good stuff. So that's kind of our mission as a group. And in that, we do apply, evaluate, and develop the performance standards for wheelchairs and wheelchair cushions. So we kind of have a hand in all of the different aspects of this. So we help to create new standards. So specifically for wheelchair cushions, we actually authored this standard on an international level to look at lateral stability properties of the C cushion. We sit on the ANSI RESNA and ISO kind of boards. I don't personally do, but obviously Patricia Karg and Dave Brienza also do as well. And we can help with all of the different modifications and kind of improvements that can be made to these standards. So we help with that. And we perform the testing itself, as we said. So some examples of that for cushions that you could look at are, how we look at the pressure distribution, not from a clinical standpoint, but from a more mechanical engineering standpoint, right? So we're looking at how well a cushion is distributing pressure over the surface of the cushion at the interface using a standardized wooden indenter butt, if you will, right? So we're looking at a very kind of standardized version of that test. We look at how far this simulated bottom or this indenter sinks into the cushion. We look at the immersion of a cushion. We look at how much the cushion is kind of wrapping around the bottom of the indenter. How much is it enveloping your butt? The stability test, like I mentioned before, we're looking at how much a cushion can help you maintain stability during like a tilt action of the pelvis. So those are a few different examples. And then we have broader ones as well to look at durability, flammability, moisture regulation of the cushion, different properties of the cushion that can all be identified using standardized tests, like the ones I had just shown a minute or two ago. And our facility, so we work in conjunction, obviously, with our tissue integrity management lab, which we recently added to the ISWP site to test over 50 cushions. We've created this library of cushion data around, and each of these things here are listed as codes. In the US, cushions are coded for reimbursement, and they are kind of labeled as general use cushions or skin protection, and that's what the labeling is here. Basically, we've tested a bunch of different cushions with different constructs, different setups, et cetera, to kind of get an idea of what does the market look like? What are the different types of cushions? How are they performing? And using standardized tests to look at that. And again, just to clarify, like I said, we did just recently, as Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, join the ISWP testing centers as the Tissue Integrity Management Lab, which is where we do all of our cushion testing. As part of our RARC, we've also done wheelchair and caster testing and wheelchair rolling resistance testing, both of which are completed through the ISWP testing center here at Pitt. So we kind of team up. Those are both available on the ISWP testing center's website as kind of where we get our testing and our data for our wheelchair and cushion standards group. But the main thing, like I said before, is how do we translate all of the data that comes out of this testing? There's a ton of different variables. There's a ton of different metrics to look at when we're testing cushions, when we're looking at casters, when we're looking at wheelchairs. And how do we get that out there and translate that for everyone? And so what we have done, and I'll put the links in the chat, is create this group, and we've created an online presence on wheelchairstandards.pitt.edu. And on that site, we house a bunch of fact sheets, conference proceedings we've written, publications, videos about how to do testing, as well as webinars that have been recorded. And we include all of that on our site, so you can kind of explore it and start to learn a little bit about what we do. And we also have a series of product selection tools or data exploration tools that we can show you. We can also, you can scan the QR code and follow us on LinkedIn. That also kind of gives you up-to-date information about what we're doing as a group, the types of webinars we're holding, what new information's been posted, et cetera. So you can scan that if you want. And again, we'll put these links in the chat. And like I said before, we have a bunch of information. So we have a lot of information in terms of fact sheets. So we look at wheel rolling resistance. What does that mean? You know, how much when you roll your wheelchair on different surfaces, how much weight does it feel like you're actually, pushing along with you? You can look at that fact sheet. There's fact sheets about caster quality. There's ones just generically about what are performance standards and how can I use them? Why are they relevant to me? And then again, with the cushion selection and cushion performance testing, we have some on that as well, and guidance on how to interpret those metrics. I broadly mentioned it before, but we do have videos. We're in the process of kind of going through and creating videos about the testing that we do, both on the cushion side and the caster and wheelchair rolling resistance side. And then under educational workshops, that's where you can find our most up-to-date webinars that we held to talk about the standards and how to implement them. And those webinars, like I said, could be something like just meeting us, talking to us about what's going on, talking about a specific test. We talked about immersion. And then most recently, we did a Give Thanks for Standards series back in November. You probably got a email about this, and some of you may have attended. Basically, it was just a state of the science webinar series about all the work that we're doing, again, on the wheelchair, caster, and cushion standards testing side. And then there's publications and conference proceedings to check out and look at for all of those different categories. They're sorted by the year that they were produced. They're sorted by the category, so you can look at, again, cushions, casters, or wheel performance, and then also by author. So if you're interested in the work of a specific person, or you want to see kind of what's going on, you can search through those. I included just an example here of how we're trying to, and this is one of the conference proceedings, just an example of a type of publication or conference proceeding that we're putting out. So we're looking at how do you interpret these standards, How do you visualize them in a way that is easy to interpret? So this is an example. You can scan the QR code or check it out on the website of just a way to interpret the results of the standards. And lastly, we're looking at developing several interactive tools, excuse me, that you can go in and kind of play around with our data, look at different things. There's 2 of those right now. We've launched the Cushion Data Exploration tool, which is found under the Explore Our Data tab, and I'll include a PDF on that as well in the chat, that allows you to kind of go in and interact with our data, look at the different cushions. They are blinded at the moment, but you can look at all of them in terms of how things are performing, how our performance is changing over time, things like that. That is all in that tool. We also have a rolling resistance calculator under development to look at, just the how different weights and different conditions can affect how you're pushing your wheelchair and how that affects the user, and what the different features of the casters or wheels, what effects that has on the person. So those are a couple different tools that we have going on through the Wheelchair Standards Group. And those are some other things that we can look into and talk about further. So that was a very broad kind of quick overview of everything that we do. And I will, like I said, I'll put those things in the chat. But the idea again is just that we're translating these performance standards into things that are meaningful and understandable for a lot of different groups. And our goal is to just be a resource and a place to help and consult with people like yourselves and different people in the field. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Alex. Does anybody have a question for Alex? And we will be trying to link all the resources that Alex presented today also as part of the wiki. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Alex. She will be a lot of helpful with all this information that you can find in the website.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen again. We're just gonna do, actually, you know what? Before I share it, I would like to send a quick poll to all of the presenters, and I would kindly ask you to please help me respond in this. When should we meet next? And if you want to present a topic in our coming meetings. So this will be just helpful for us to know who is interested in presenting next, so we can reach out to you all. And in the next sharing screen that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to propose a couple more things. So let's see. So let's take a couple of minutes until we see all the responses, and I'll let you know when's the next time we're going to meet. We're more likely to continue to do this on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So we're just trying to define if we're going to be doing this in May or June. So from what it looks like, May is the winner. So we're going to see you on the second week of May, which is going to be May 11th. That's when we're going to be meeting next. So thank you so much for those who are interested in presenting, and also those who are having some maybe options there. So okay. Let me share my screen now for 1 second. Okay. So now, Nancy, can you please help me sharing on the chat the link that I shared with you, please, before? I would like to ask to all of our presenters to please go ahead and click on that link that Nancy is going to share with us in a couple seconds. And the reason why I'm asking you to enter to that link is because I would like to also propose some topics. And if you're interested in presenter, or if you want a presenter to be part of our next meetings, please share this with us. I have copied the 3 more ranked topics from our last meeting. So if you think this is not something you would like to see anymore in our next meeting, please feel free to edit. All of those little fields are editable, so just double click on them and please feel free to go there. We are on slide 15. If anyone is questioning where you have to go. And you should see a message from Nancy that starts with docs.google. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, we are on slide 15. I know, Shauna, you were interested in seeing some information about test dummies for smaller people or children. I don't know if you have any information about that, or if you're looking for, I don't know what I did. I clicked somewhere. Let me, I couldn't see what I did. Okay. One second, please. My computer is going a little crazy, so I cannot share my screen right now.
I can share if you'd like.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be awesome.
And maybe if there's also topics of interest, you can just drop them in the chat.
Yeah. I know that, Miriam, you also were interested in presenting about the crash testing. So maybe if you and Nicole are interested, please let us know and we would be happy to include you as our next presenters as well.
One thing I would add, you can put in the chat, but we're just part of setting up a test lab over in India at Mobility India in Bangalore. And so I think it would be nice to have an overview from that team of the process and how that went in terms of capacity building. You can just reach out to Anand about that, or maybe get the team from Mobility India to present.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. Well, if not, in the meantime, we can also check with all of you and see if you have any other ideas for our future meetings. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. It was a great discussion. So hopefully we will see all of you next time in May. And thank you so much for joining us. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank
you. Thank you, John.
We'll see you with better weather. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah, cheers, bye.
Bye.